let's say your idea calls for something really expensive, like you have to build a factory, or you have to invest a lot of money up front in order to do what you need to do.
Okay.
Now, most of us don't have millions of dollars just waiting around to invest in things like factories. So a lot of times we have to work with someone else whose form of value is capital, investing money in a business, or lending, or all of those things. We have to try to get our capital from someplace else.
Okay.
And this is actually a concept called a hierarchy of funding. Now, it's often quite good, if you really need a lot of money, there are people out there who have it. And there are people out there who are willing to let you work with the capital that they have, but that doesn't come free.
Right.
There's typically a financial cost. So, if you get a loan, you're paying back interest. If you are accepting capital from an investor, you're giving them partial ownership of the company as compensation. But typically, either when you work with a lender or you work with an investor, it's not just a financial transaction. There's actually a certain amount of control that you typically give up over the company, depending on how much money you either accept in investment or in loans.
Control and like which way are we going to go? What projects are we going to work on? Like
yes,
that?
Decisions that get made on what gets spent, what projects are done. The classic example is sometimes investors will ask for a certain amount of investment. They want to put one of their representatives on the board of directors of that company. And the board of directors can make decisions on executives, on compensation, on projects, on all of those things. And they do that because it allows them to protect the value of their investment from, one of the founders making a really stupid decision.
Got it.
And, the general rule is the more money that you accept, the more control you have to give up.
Totally.
In compensation for receiving that money.
Yep.
So, there's a hierarchy. So, obviously, if you pay everything from yourself in cash, well, you retain complete control. You can do whatever you want to do. If you finance it via credit cards, you still get to really keep control because, yes, you have to, you're paying interest back to the credit card, but, Visa or American Express isn't going to call you up and say, you should run your business this way today.
Right.
So you get to keep control. Now, further up the chain, let's say you go to a bank and try to get a line of credit or a loan. Now, for small loans, you can typically do that. It's called uncollateralized, which means, they're not going to, seize your house or your car.
Okay.
They're just going to try to collect money if you don't pay it back.
Okay.
Now, if you want a larger loan, they're going to ask for some form of collateral. So, you're going to sign away, the deed to your car or the mortgage on your house. A mortgage is a collateralized loan. Okay. It says, if you don't pay this, we're going to take the house. And that's how, you can get $100,000 or $200,000 or, sometimes up to $1 million in home loans, because if you don't pay them, they'll have control over the house.
Makes sense.
And typically, the more money you ask for, the larger the collateral that's involved.
Sure.
Now, there's actually a specific type of financing that some banks offer business called receivables financing. Okay? Which a receivable is just, you have an order from somebody, they haven't paid you, but they're on the hook, they owe you a certain amount of money.
Okay.
Banks will sometimes give you loans, give you financing, if you turn over control of your receivables to them. So so you're basically using your receivables as collateral.
Interesting.
And you can sometimes get millions of dollars worth of financing in this way, but here's the thing. The bank has control over your receivables, not you, which can often be a very tricky thing. And that's typically, some of the largest types of loans that a bank will do, but you're giving over a substantial amount of control over your business. Now, above that, is typically, where you start to bridge over from financing from a bank side, from a lending side, into an ownership side. So, there will be individual investors who will give, anywhere between a couple thousand to maybe $100,000 or so in what's called angel investing.
Okay.
They're just individuals. They're giving you this capital in exchange for a passive, very small share of the business. They get to make no decisions. You may use them as an advisor or whatever,
Sure.
but they don't have any power or control over the business. They're a partial owner, but they're silent. They really don't have any decision-making ability. As you work up the tier of venture capital, so, accepting $500,000, $1 million, $2 million, all the way up into hundreds of millions, typically, the more money you accept from an investor, the more control that they will want over the business to protect their investment.
Yeah.
And this is, sometimes you'll hear stories of these businesses that have accepted venture capital, and the board of directors, which, if you raise enough money, will probably be mostly taken up by investors.
Yeah.
Sometimes they kick the founder of the company out of the company they started.
Didn't that happen at Apple?
Yeah. Steve Jobs was actually ousted by investors from the company that he started because they didn't think he was the right person for the job to take the company in the direction that they wanted to go. And they actually, the company floundered for a number of years until they finally brought him back. But by taking on investment, that can happen. So typically, the general rule in the hierarchy of funding is the more funding you accept, the more control you give up. Now, that can have, benefits and detriments. Sometimes these people that you bring in with investment can offer you advice or consulting or, can bring in other investors or resources that you otherwise may not have. I know 37 Signals, a software company, had absolutely no need of investment. They were self-financed the entire way, but they brought Jeff Bezos from Amazon.com in as an investor, not because they needed the money, but because they wanted to talk with Jeff.
Cool.
So, and they use him as an advisor because now he's a partial owner of the company. So there are some ways to use it well.
Okay.
But be very aware that, there's a quote from Ralph Waldo Emerson that's very good here, is money often costs too much.
Okay.
And that's very true when you're trying to get financing from someone else. You may be paying for it financially. You also may be paying for it in terms of control or autonomy or the types of decisions that you can make. So it's very much a double-edged sword. So, financing will allow you to do things that you might not otherwise be able to do, but there is a cost, and that cost is typically control.
Yeah, it's like that discussion about if you decide to sell shares of stock. So many companies get caught up in just having to make a certain amount. What is that called? Like every quarter or something?
Oh yeah, actually, the ultimate form. I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah.
Is taking a company public.
Right.
Is essentially becoming a public company and operating on a quarterly basis, with all the reporting and all of those things.
And you're more freaking out about showing that you've made earnings than actually doing anything positive.
Right. And that's, you've essentially given up control over the company to investors almost completely. And so, it is very much a double-edged sword. It can help you do things you might not otherwise be able to do. It can also, worst case, you could lose control of the company that you created. So, just be very careful. As a general rule of thumb, and this is something that we're going to talk about next, as a general rule of thumb, do not accept financing of any type for things that either aren't force multipliers or won't allow you to do something you cannot otherwise do without financing. So use financing as a capital means of last resort. If you don't need it, don't get it. And I think there's a pretty pervasive myth that a company has made it, particularly now. It's like the purpose of starting a company, create the perfect business plan, go out and raise a $5 million round of venture capital, and then you are golden. And
Yikes.
yeah, yeah, because not only have you preemptively sold off
Yeah.
usually a major stake of this company that you intend to create.
But you're $5 million in the hole at the beginning.
You're five, yep.
Yikes.
And the other thing is, there's an incentive cause bias too, because when an investor is giving you money, their goal is what's called an exit strategy or liquidity. Their goal is to sell the company at some multiple for what they bought it for. That's what they're trying to do. And so you may not be trying to do that, but your investors who may now own a large portion of the company are trying to sell you off. That's how they get their money.
Yeah.
And so it's one of those things that you have to be very clear of what are the intentions of your investors, what are you trying to do? And, also it's not true that, the only way to succeed in business is to take on, oodles of venture capital money.
Right.
And now, you're a real business. That's not true. In actuality, you're not a real business until you reach the point of sufficiency.
Right.
You start selling things. And so financing, again, double-edged sword, can be worthwhile, can be beneficial. Just be very careful on how you use it because it can come back to bite you if you're not careful.